Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 East Texas Employment Survey virtual launch party. So glad you could make it, and I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to share with you today. Before we go any further, I do want to thank our sponsors, the Tyler Economic Development Corporation and the Chambers of Commerce from Tyler, Lindale, Jacksonville, and Athens. It truly was an East Texas effort to get the word out. So thank all of you for that. I also want to thank Tom Mullins of the Tyler EDC and Dr. Reyes of the Hibbs Institute for input on our survey questions. I also want to give you one other note. You may have noticed in the registration that we asked you to donate to the Hand Up Network. There's a couple of reasons that we did that. One of them, this is an organization that the mayor of Tyler has tapped to be a part of our community response to COVID-19. And so we want to give them some recognition for that. But there's also some really good things that they do in our community. To tell you more about that, I want to show you just a very brief video.
Almost everyone experiences a point in time when life seems to be wanting to crush your world. The Hand Up Network uses a unique approach in providing assistance to people who are facing hardships by using a long-term plan and avoiding a handout approach.
Our focus is really to try to make sure that the people that are really in a tough season in life have a partner that will help them along the way. We're not here to provide a handout. We're all about, if you're willing to help yourself, we'll come alongside you and help you all the way. If you're going to walk in the door and say, please give me something, we'll give you a hug and tell you God loves you, but we'll send you on your way. Because the only way a person really gets out of their situation is if they're willing to do it themselves.
The Hand Up Network's Christ-centered programs and services are all based on what is known as the 5 fingers of focus. Those 5 areas are the person's spiritual condition, their physical and mental well-being, their education and skill sets, their financial situation, and their support system. The Hand Up Network focuses on healing the whole person through teaching and mentoring that guides individuals toward a self-sustaining lifestyle.
Mentorship is really the heart of our program. It's directing them towards forming some long-term goals, forming better habits, helping them come up with new ways to view the world and tackle situations so that by the time that they leave here, they're able to continue tackling life as it happens on their own.
The Hand Up Network doesn't replicate services provided by other organizations. The network seeks out organizations that are good at what they do and forms partnerships with those groups using written agreements that define the relationship, allowing both organizations to better assist people in need. The Hand Up Network also provides 4 areas of community response. The outreach team locates people who can benefit from the services and provides information that may be helpful to them. The community response team works with network partners to locate people with specific needs, such as plumbers, carpenters, or electrical repair. The emergency response teams have experience with everything from tsunamis and hurricanes to fire and tornadoes. And the Hand Up Network will provide assistance to first responders in whatever capacity may be needed. The final and perhaps most important team is the prayer and support team. They're there to pray with people in times of tragedy and provide the spiritual support that can be so important.
People in our community can engage with the Hand Up Network through their giving, through their time, through their experience.
It doesn't matter about what has happened to you in your past. You can always pick up the pieces and go forward. If don't nobody else forgive you, God forgives you, and God will help open those doors. So that's what Hand Up Network does.
Okay, so just as a reminder, we would encourage you, if you haven't already, to donate to the Hand Up Network. You can do that by going to handupnetwork.com/donate. And as a reminder, Express Employment Professional is going to match all the contributions from this event up to $10 per participant. And so please be generous if you can. All right, let's talk about this survey. I hope that you've already received the infographic by email earlier today so that you can be looking at it as we speak. If you've seen that, you may have noticed we got 542 responses, and that represents 491 businesses here in East Texas. So that's a statistically relevant sample. Today, we're going to be conducting an overview of the data points on this infographic, and our panel of experts is going to be giving comments on each section to help us all dive deeper into this information and glean some takeaways. If you have questions during this time, we want your questions to respect your time. We're not going to stop and answer them today, but I'm going to give you 2 ways to send them to us, and then we're going to get answers to those and get the answers back to you. One way, you can use the chat feature on the Zoom meeting, and you can chat your questions. That'll go to our moderator. We'll collect those, or you can simply email me, adam.morrow@expresspros.com. I think all of you have gotten an email from me. We'll collect those questions and get the answers right back to you. This meeting is going to run right about an hour and 20 minutes. If you, for some reason, have to step out for a moment to take care of business, I understand. And don't worry, we're recording this meeting, and we're going to send out a link to each of you at the conclusion of the meeting, and so that you can reference it later. I do want to make sure if you do have to step out that you do come back and stick around to the end, because we will be giving away a new iPad at the conclusion of our time together. All right, what do you say? Let's get started. Now I'd like to introduce 2 leaders who are extremely respected in Tyler, Texas, Tom Mullins and Barbara Bass. Tom has the CEO and chairman of the Economic Development Council here in Tyler. And I believe, Tom, you're the only person who's led the state economic development organizations for 2 different states. Is that right?
Yeah, I was the chairman of the Industrial Development Council for the state of Minnesota, and then also chaired the Texas Economic Development Council after moving to Texas here. And you have been in that role many years and have had such success. You've brought honors to Tyler through your work. Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for the invitation.
You got it. And also Barbara Bass, somebody who probably doesn't need any invitation or introduction. Mayor of Tyler from 2008 to 2014, longtime CPA for Golub Morgan Petty. I think you were mayor as long as we could have you, and then the rules just said you couldn't be mayor anymore. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm so honored that you guys would join us. I want to jump right in. We're talking through our employment survey, and I want to talk specifically about the questions that deal with how businesses are feeling the economic impact. So I want to just talk through what they said. 71% of businesses say COVID has decreased their revenue expectations, either somewhat or significantly. 32% have had a reduction in force of some kind, so they've had to lay people off, and 39% have reduced their hours. So probably not a surprise, but this event has had a disruptive effect on local businesses and our local economy. And so as leaders who've been here for a while, who've seen Tyler in ups and downs, I'd love to hear your perspective, because I know you guys have seen some other hard times. So Barbara, I know you've worked with many business leaders, both as a CPA and as mayor of Tyler. You know, what do you think are some keys for East Texas businesses to weather this downturn?
Well, I think, first of all, the survey's right on target. You know, even in the CPA world, tax season was not tax season this year, so to speak, because as soon as this started, they cut from, the 65, 70-hour weeks back to 40 hours max, and just started trying to figure out what they needed to do to keep things going. And then, obviously, everyone else was impacted across the board. And being in the CPA business over 40 years, I went through the 80s when we had just a horrendous downturn, and it just went on forever, seemed like. And then obviously we had the big Great Recession about the time I got elected mayor, and then now we're dealing with this. And I think some of the commonalities is, first of all, are the things we can make things better. First of all, recognize, and the sooner you react and the sooner you cut back and try to do the most to keep your cash reserves and everything else is important. But once you get over the initial part or initial shock of that, really looking at what you can do when things are slow. When I got elected mayor, it seemed like the next day before the inking was dry on my swearing in certificate that we started planning. I said, in business, when things are slow, we plan. It's time to step back, reevaluate, see what you can do, what you're doing right, what you want to do better, maybe develop a new plan for a new product line, new initiative, whatever. It's a great time to use the time we have right now to refocus and be ready to implement what you're developing after things pick back up. It seems like we have these great ideas. We're right in the middle of just trying to take care of everything that's going on every day, and we don't have the time to do that. So as a small business owner, use this as a time to kind of refocus and reassess what's working well, what's not working, whatever you need in your business.
And obviously that leadership really paid off for the city of Tyler. Like you said, the ink was hardly dry, swearing you in, and then there was a big crash. And but we came through that very well.
Yes, for the time I was finishing, about the time I was finishing up, the economy was getting better. So the mayor before me seemed to have a lot of money, and of course to do city projects, and the current mayor has had some. He certainly had his challenges for the last 6 years that were different than what the rest of us, and the fact that he can't even get out of office and get the next mayor elected. So we appreciate what he's doing.
Well, Tom, I'm curious to hear from you. I know you've kind of overseen a lot of growth in Tyler's economy. What effect do you think the diversification of our economy will have on this incident?
Well, just to expand on kind of the timeline that Barbara laid out, I came here in 1989 because of the energy collapse of the 80s, which really hurt all of Texas, and East Texas was not spared from that, because East Texas at that time was much more dependent on energy and connected to energy. And the goal was to try to diversify from the economy. And so we began focusing on other sectors, ways to bring funding into the economy through manufacturing and distribution, retirees moving into the area, tourism, medical, regional retail, higher education. So we put a lot of building blocks in place to kind of insulate Tyler from its dependence on one major sector. Now, energy is still important,
right?
But it's not as big a piece of the economic pie as it was historically. And so when we had the downturn, the fiscal crisis in 2008, we had somewhat of an impact, but energy in Texas at that time was doing pretty well. So it kind of helped us overall. And then in 14 and 15, energy went down again, but we had diversified to all the things I mentioned: medical, education, retail, financial center, manufacturing, distribution, retirees, tourism, technology, regional, state and federal government center here, in addition to energy. So any community would like to achieve that kind of diversity and strength. So when one area is down, some other areas are up, and give you some balance and some predictability and growth. So I think Tyler and Smith County are better positioned maybe than other parts of the state to come back from this pandemic as companies start getting more active. You're starting to see the economy open up now. The governor has allowed certain sectors of the service and retail economies to allow customers to come back in with some precautions.
Right. And
hopefully keep our fingers crossed that they'll be able to start generating revenues. People will get confidence; they're not going to get sick, and the growth in those sectors will continue. So, I'm optimistic. I think that the results of your survey indicated that the companies, and the majority of those companies that responded to your survey, 530 some all told, were smaller companies. You know, they had fewer than 20 employees. So that's encouraging to see their optimism, and they are working right now to position themselves, number one, to survive, number two, to stay safe and stay well for their employees and their customers, and then number three, to expand when it's the appropriate time to expand that to a full operation.
Right. You mentioned optimism, Tom. Our survey says that 70% of these business owners are somewhat or very optimistic when they look at the rest of 2020. Barbara, I'm curious, what's your perspective on the way that East Texas can come through this crisis?
Well, I think because of some of the things Tom's talking about with the diversification, we've got a broad enough diversification that we're going to come back pretty quick, like, you know, or at least faster than some of the other areas. And I think that optimism is probably the companies that function fairly conservatively anyway. So if you're not carrying enough debt and you're not worried about just being so leveraged that it pulls you under, although the banks are working with people as well as everybody else is, all the business owners, you know, I think your optimism is that this is not because we were in a bad economy before, which these other crises or other years that we've talked about going through were really just bad economies nationwide. But this is a health-driven issue. And I think the positiveness of people knowing they've got good products, good services, and that we will get through this is making all the difference. And that's why you're getting that 70%.
Mm-hmm.
Getting there and assessing where you are and what you can do and trying to keep things just, you know, even if it's just at break even or minimize your losses, that all has to be done. But the positive attitude of just saying, we will get through this and let's go ahead and plan for what we're going to do as we come out of it will make a huge difference in the way some of these companies are recovering.
Absolutely. Yeah, it feels true, Barbara. What I hear you saying is in the other economic downturns, there was something wrong with the structure of the economy, maybe. But in this case, we had a healthy economy.
Yes.
And we just had one factor that
right.
Our belief is when we can resolve that factor, hopefully our economy will rev right back up. And those that have used the time, like you suggest, to be ready to prepare, if we all do that, then I imagine we'll surge back. What do you think?
I think we've got a real good chance of just pulling on out of this. And, you know, part of that is that even with the economic downturn and having a strong economy, we have just a good foundation of people here, and revenue will be down. We've lost 2 months of revenue. You know, so if you just figure we're going to get 10/12 of a year rather than 12/12 or whatever, and probably even less than that in a lot of businesses because they won't come back as fast. But we have other businesses that didn't get hit as hard, and they will help bring the rest of them up. And part of it's just getting back to work, you know, getting to where we're all working and doing what we can to get things moving again. It won't be an overnight fix, but if we're working on it with each of our companies and as a community, we will get there.
I love that encouragement. Okay, last word, Tom. What else would you offer to somebody who's in this spot right now, the respondents to this survey? Anything else you could tell them?
Well, we're lucky to be in a regional center with a lot of resources, and we work very closely with the Tyler Junior College Small Business Development Center on the West Loop. Don Proudfoot, the director there, he understands a lot of these state and federal low-interest loan programs or no-interest loan, and sometimes they can turn into grants to help companies through this difficult time. And so I would encourage people to reach out to the Small Business Development Center and Don Proudfoot and ask for some assistance there. We have great resources at the University of Texas at Tyler, especially the Souls College of Business. Dr. Carrie Camp has been involved directly with a large number of small businesses, retail and service businesses, providing technical assistance to those, giving them marketing ideas and helping them through other technical and fiscal challenges that they're experiencing. The Better Business Bureau has put together a grant program for companies that have experienced at least a 50% loss in revenue. And they cover almost, I think it's around 18 counties in the northeastern part of Texas. Mm-hmm. And so that's a resource that I think people should take advantage of. And we have some very talented loan packagers here in Tyler. The Greater Texas Capital Corporation, Todd Buchanan, has expertise in terms of putting these loan packages together. John Hart, who used to be with Greater Texas, has now gone out on his own with a company called Source Funding. He's one of the best in the whole state, and even beyond for my money, for putting packages together using some of these state and federal programs that are available to small companies. So the good news is we have a lot of very highly skilled technical resources here that can provide some assistance at this difficult time.
That's great. And we'll try to get maybe some contact information for those who want to reach out to the appropriate channels and share that with folks. Thank you for mentioning that. That's so great. Guys, I really appreciate you guys taking a minute to share with us. I know you've encouraged all those who are participating today, and I really just wish you guys the best. Again, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'd like to introduce somebody who I'm very honored to have with us today, Dr. Ray Perryman, who is the president and CEO of the Perryman Group, which is an economic research and analysis firm based in Waco, Texas. Welcome, Dr. Perryman.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And there's so many good things that we could say about you. You've got a bachelor's in math from Baylor, PhD in economics from Rice, honorary doctorate from the International Institute for Advanced Studies. You've been just honored so much for your work in economics around Texas and the country. Probably, I was telling you earlier, one of my favorite sayings about you comes from the Dallas Morning News: the state's preeminent economist and a barbecue connoisseur. So,
I like that one too.
And of course, most important to us, you're from East Texas, and so we're really thankful for you to spend a couple minutes with us today. So what we're doing, we've surveyed area businesses. We've got responses from 530 or so businesses in East Texas, and we're trying to get the pulse on what they're thinking and feeling right now and how they view the coming year. And so the results told us probably what we didn't need a survey to tell us, that this whole COVID thing has been disruptive to the economy. Specifically, here's what the survey said. 71% said that this time has decreased their revenue expectations. Not surprising. 32% have had a reduction in force of some kind, and 39% have reduced their hours. So based on your experience from a macro level, what are some keys for East Texas businesses to weather this economic downturn?
Well, as you said, Adam, the numbers are not surprising. I mean, we're seeing this all over the country because we've, in essence, shut the world economy down. And when you do that, obviously these sorts of things begin to happen. The primary thing I would advise people is to remember this is a temporary situation. It's caused by a health crisis. It wasn't something broken in the economy that had to be fixed. It's a most unfortunate thing. We've never seen anything like it. We've never fallen this hard, this fast before. But by the same token, we don't have a lot of structural things to go out and fix. So the most important thing is keep your structure together. Do everything you can to do that. Take advantage of the resources that are out there. There's some governmental resources to help if you qualify for those. There's a lot of information out there to help people along. Try to work with your vendors, work with your customers, work with everyone you can work with to work your way through this. Everyone's in the same boat, and everyone's having to deal with it. And so, for example, if you rent your facilities, as an example, if you're a good tenant, your landlord's going to want to keep you. So and they'll work with you. And the key thing is, none of us caused this, and there's nothing we can do to prevent it right now except listen to the health professionals and do what they tell us to. But in the interim, we can pull together and work on that. So that's the single thing I would do is try to keep your basic structure together, keep your workforce together as best you can, keep your equipment together, all of those things, so that as the economy starts to recover, you can come back.
That's great. So there wasn't a problem with the economy before. So once this effect on the economy is removed, everything's in place, hopefully, to move back to where we were.
Well, I mean, we were in the middle of the longest economic expansion in history when this started. And if you go back and look at the last 30 or 40 years of what's happened in the economy, we had a mortgage crisis because we had some structural problems. We had a dot-com crisis because we had some structural problems. We had a savings and loan and real estate crisis because we had structural problems we had to fix. In those situations, I was on the task forces for all three of them. They bring a bunch of economists in to try to solve the problem. This time around, we're bringing in health professionals. I mean, they've got to have a few of us on the side for comic relief or whatever, but basically, this is a health problem. And so the usual solutions don't work. But by the same token, that means we don't have something big, broken that has to be fixed inside the economy. We simply have to work through this and weather it.
I see. Well, I think from our survey, what we see is people have that same kind of feeling. Actually, 70% of the respondents are very or somewhat optimistic about how our local economy will perform the rest of 2020 or by the end of 2020. What reasons do you see maybe to be optimistic? How do things look from your perspective?
I think there's reason to expect it, but long before the end of the year, we'll be seeing economic growth again. Because the key thing is to try to keep the health crisis under control, not have to go through this shutdown situation 2 or 3 times. I mean, that's what we definitely don't want to see. Assuming we do that, assuming we do the things that we need to do from that perspective, then there's every reason to think the economy will start coming back, because when people are able to open stores, people start shopping. When people are able to open factories, people start working again. As the global economy opens up, demand will come back for a lot of things. So there's a lot going on, and we're looking at it industry by industry at a great level of detail. And projections for Tyler and the East Texas area show a net loss in jobs for the year, but much more right now than what you see for the end of the year. You see us getting some of that back. And I think that's pretty much the pattern everywhere. The rate varies a little bit depending on what type of economy you have. But Tyler has a strong economy. You have a strong base of biotechnology and other things that will be part of the solution to this going forward, part of the opportunities that this creates once we're past it. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. But it's going to be a tough year, and particularly the next few months. It's going to be a difficult adjustment to make. There's no way to get around that.
Sure enough. And you mentioned your projections for East Texas. Is there any other economic information that would be helpful for local business people to know?
Well, there's a lot of information out there. I mean, again, the Small Business Administration has some information on their websites to help small businesses. The International Economic Development Council has some information out there. There's a lot of information out there together. We've done forecasts for Tyler and East Texas by industry to kind of give you some idea of what to expect. Again, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen here, how fast the help's going to come back, and that sort of thing. But we put out our best call now based on a very detailed analysis. It's on our website, perrymangroup.com. You can download it. There's no charge for it or anything. I know the Hibbs Institute has put out some numbers of what they're seeing there in Tyler and the local area. Those can be downloaded, I'm sure, from their website or PEDC's website. And so there are a lot of information resources out there. And again, I would encourage you, to the extent you qualify for any of the assistance programs that are taking place, and there will likely be more of them going forward. Make sure to take advantage of that if it fits your company, because this is all about keeping it together and working and getting us through this, and then moving on to the big opportunities that will be out there later.
Excellent. We'll make sure we get everybody the website for the Perryman Group so they can see what you're talking about. And man, I really appreciate you spending a minute with us today and giving us this information.
My pleasure.
You bet. You have a great afternoon, sir.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Adam.
You bet. Bye. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Jennifer Hoytsma. She is the VP of Marketing and Corporate Strategy for Mentoring Minds. And Mentoring Minds is there you are, Jennifer. Hey, welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you so much for being here. Like I said, you're the VP of Marketing for Corporate Strategy. Those of you who haven't met Jennifer, Mentoring Minds produces cutting edge curriculum. They've won many awards for their products. And not only that, I think they've been named one of the best companies to work for in Texas. Jennifer, in her spare time, is also the CEO of Embark Women, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the success of women-led ventures. So Jennifer, you're like a Swiss Army knife. You've got a lot of talents. And so I'm really thankful that you're here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the East Texas Employment Survey. We all know that every business has had to adapt. We've been forced to adapt to the situation we find ourselves in, and that's bared out in the survey. According to the survey, almost 72% of businesses replace face-to-face encounters with virtual or telephone ones. Just over 50% began making significant use of video conferencing. I know myself, I probably couldn't actually organize a conference call, but I can do a Zoom meeting now, right?
Right.
And then close to 50% have implemented or begun to implement some remote work procedures. And then when we ask, what do you think is going to be permanent? Many people said probably something around remote work is going to end up sticking around. Now I know from my years in recruiting, I interview a lot of professionals, and a lot of people say their ideal job is working remotely. And I said, have you ever worked remotely before? And they say no. And then I know, it's not always as simple as you think it would be.
Right.
And that bears out a little bit in our survey as well, because businesses, almost a third of businesses, when they think about their top challenge, they say, I know I'm going to need to create a strategic plan or implement some new processes or procedures. And I think this will fit in that category. So I understand Mentoring Minds has a significant portion of your employees working remotely. Is that right?
We do, yes.
Okay, but it hasn't always been so as widespread as it is now, correct?
Correct. It's been a transition for us, so I would say when I started at Mentoring Minds 8 years ago, we had a remote workforce. Our sales team was remote, right? So they would support their territories. So they were, what we call outside sales. And so they were remote, and maybe just a couple of others in the company were remote at that time. But over the past 8 years, we've transitioned to where all of us are capable of working remotely, even though it's been the recent situation with COVID that has propelled all of us to literally, be working from home. So, yeah.
So was there a point in which, in your mind, you thought, okay, we really need to move in this direction as an organization?
I'd say it was a few years ago, so I have to check with Ashley on the exact number of years, but so I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago that we made a concerted effort to start thinking about, okay, so what happens when an employee asks us to work remotely? What happens when we are looking for, talent that maybe we can't find locally and we want to, hire remotely? Is there a difference between hiring remotely versus hiring someone locally and then that person deciding to move, right? What accommodations do we make for someone that's working remotely? Is it different if it's voluntary remote versus we're expecting them to work remotely? So we started putting those policies in place, several years ago. So by the time, the spring happened and we were all, forced to go home, everyone was in a position to do so.
Wow, that's awesome. And I think when we were talking earlier, you mentioned, was there an employee you had that you were going to lose?
Yeah, actually, no. And I was, had just moved into the marketing team and I was managing the team, and one of my best employees came and said, hey, I have to move, but I don't want to leave Mentoring Minds. And I was like, well, why would you leave Mentoring Minds? You can keep working, right? And it was sort of just as an automatic response for me. And then that sort of propelled me and others to start thinking about, okay, well, what happens if someone wants to move but also wants to keep their job? And we realized that we don't want to lose talent. There's no reason to lose talent if they want to continue to work for us. And recognizing that we have the technology, we have everything we need to make it work. We just need to, allow it.
Sure. And so you mentioned you got with your VP of HR and y'all started thinking about implementing this change. How did that go? How did you implement the change in that direction?
Yeah, I worked with Ashley and, the rest of the leadership team to really think through what does it mean to allow employees to work remotely? And so, Ashley and her team really took it from the process and kind of legal standpoint and all of the documents that we need to sign. And, even I would say for people that are local to Tyler still and come into the office, we have an office at Work Hub. And so we enjoy having the flexibility to work there, but I'm also able to work from home even, pre-COVID. So we have a remote work policy. What does that look like? What are we agreeing to? What kind of things do we maintain at the home office? So yeah, started to think through all those policies and just made sure that the leadership team was on board with it. Recognizing that that's different for every team. Like what the sales team needs to be out in the field is different than what, the marketing team might need is different than what product development might need. And so thinking through those situations case by case, team by team.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as your teams were developing these policies, what did you learn? What makes an effective remote work policy?
Well, I would say we learned that, as much as we wanted to find a document that would work for everyone, or like a policy that would work for everyone, or okay, in every situation, we're going to take care of this and the employee takes care of this, then there'd be a situation that would say, oh, well, okay, that doesn't make sense. Here, we need to do this, the employee needs to do this, right? And so coming up with clear expectations and guidelines, but also maintaining flexibility, right? Okay. And saying, here's what we're saying as a company, here's our position on remote work, but also recognizing that the manager is going to work with each team member. Things are going to change, right? We need to be able to evolve and stay flexible. And so I think that's been important. And that's something that, the HR team continually brings up with the leadership team is hey, here's what we're facing now. Is this okay? What do we want to do? Do we want to change this? Do we pay for their phone or not? Do we pay for their internet or not? How all of those things, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And so it's been an evolution for sure.
Absolutely. So that concept of some things are clear and some things are flexible. So it's going to be difficult to have a one size fits all set of rules. But what are those essentials? What are the things that really need to be clear?
I think clear guidelines on, what is the employee expected to pay for or maintain at their home office, right? Mm-hmm. What is the company responsible for paying for or maintaining? So what does the company provide in terms of equipment, technology, connectivity, right? What are the expectations on the side of the employee? I think that needs to be really clear, and that might change. And I think there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of, what's the word? Ways that can work, right? There's not an obvious answer in every situation. Mm-hmm. But that needs to be clear. So the employee is not wondering well, do I have to buy my own paper? Do I have to print all of this? Do I buy my own ink? Why am I even printing stuff, right? Those kinds of questions can be decided and made clear. Things expectations around availability and communications, I think during the day are important. But again, that's going to really change based on the team and based on your work environment and how you're expected to communicate with customers or not. Or internally. And like we were saying earlier, I think a good foundation for remote work is having a really clear, strong culture of communication at the company before you even embark on a remote policy or plan. That really lays the foundation for how everything works.
Oh, that is so powerful. If I'm a business owner, before I go here, I need to take a look at my company culture and say, right. What's our culture of communication right now? Because that's the foundation I'm going to be building this on. That's really good.
Right. I think it's easy to think about, oh, I'm going to go remote. Okay, so does everyone have a laptop? Does everyone have a monitor? Do you have a keyboard? Those to me seem pretty obvious. And I think that's what people think of first, right? Do we have the capability to do it? But then it's well, no, do we have the culture to do it? Right. Mm-hmm. Do we have strong communication practices between teams and within our, each individual team, and then across teams, cross-functionally, across the leadership team, because that's going to get exacerbated, in a bad way, or it's going to be amplified in a good way, right, when you go remote. So, and that can be a really good practice. I mean, even for us, we were, I would say, pretty flexible, and lots of us already working remotely, but the transition to everyone working remotely amplified a lot of things for us. And there's been some really positive outcomes and, some things that we've struggled with that have had to work through. So,
well, it's probably comforting for some to hear that you did have some struggles and you've come through those. So are there any pitfalls that you could share that you might help other people avoid?
Pitfalls, I'd say, one thing I think about is I need to keep talking to my employees about their setup, right? So not their physical setup, yes, but also their emotional well-being, how they're feeling remotely, because you're isolated. So even again, there's kind of during COVID and kind of forced isolation, but then also, working remotely even prior to that can still be kind of isolating, especially if you're working remotely and the majority of your team's in the office. And that was something I would say prior to COVID, we had about half in the office and half were remote on the marketing team. Mm-hmm. And so there'd be things the team that's working in the office are well, let's go to lunch, let's go get coffee. Let's do, we would do those things as a group, But then the team that's working remotely, like they're a little bit left out, right? Or they might hear that we went to lunch, or they're like, oh, well, I'm not in the office that day. So how do you stay connected with those team members? I think is something personally that I think a lot about is how do we, or if I'm going to pick up coffee and bring it to the office one day, but like, okay, well, I didn't do that for my remote employees. Do I send them a gift card, right? So they can go get their own coffee, or do I find something else to do to show that I'm appreciating them or thinking about them?
I hear you saying like some things that would happen in a workplace that might just happen naturally, you might have to be intentional about with remote work, even just to the rhythms of a day, of an office day.
That was even something I was, shout out to Ashley we used to have like huge town hall meetings, like our all hands, right, monthly. And then as more and more people were working remotely, we weren't gathering in the office. And so like when we would celebrate birthdays and we give out the like little bundt cakes, to everyone who had a birthday or an anniversary, it's like, well, we couldn't send that to people remotely. And so it's like she started sending gift cards to them instead, and making sure that they were also celebrated even though they weren't able to be in the office. So, small things like that. But then also just making sure that you're staying able to be flexible and adapting and recognizing that everyone's situations are going to change and you've got to keep, talking about them, right? Not just assuming that, okay, structures are in place and guidelines are in place and we don't have to talk about them again. And that, that when you are not connected in the office, face to face, that you just need to make more of an effort to understand that. So.
Sure. So that comes back to what you said about communication. I've heard somebody talk about leaders as chief reminding officers. Whether we're face-to-face or not, we always need to be reminding people about what's important and make sure they understand expectations and understand where we're going. And that doesn't go away if we're working remotely. We still need to communicate things.
Right.
Any other advice you might offer somebody? Let's say I'm in a business and I'm going to embark on this journey. Do you have some advice for me?
I would just say, I think it's a really great opportunity if you have the capacity and the willingness to work remotely. I think you give your employees so much flexibility, and it can give you an opportunity to examine how much autonomy you're giving those employees, and recognizing that, you don't have to supervise them necessarily by being in the office or like looking over their shoulder or making sure that they're working because they showed up, right? Showing up doesn't equal good work, right? And so I think it gives leaders an opportunity to think like, well, what do I expect out of my employees? How am I monitoring their work? Not monitoring, but like evaluating their work and like looking at their outcomes as opposed to like how much they're working, right? Or when they're working. And knowing that, like maybe we need a flexible work schedule. Maybe some people need to work 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. instead of 8 to 5, right? Maybe that's okay. Like maybe we can examine some assumptions about the typical work schedule. Maybe if I give them some more freedom and autonomy, they're going to, turn out even greater work and have like understand that if we're trusting them even more, then they can trust us more with their expertise. And I just think that there's so much benefit to that for, the individual teams and then the larger organizations. Once that is unlocked, there's a lot of potential there. So yeah,
that's great.
It's been a really gratifying thing for me to experience and watch over the years.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you know of any resources somebody could turn to of somebody who could kind of talk through this with them? Any resources?
Yeah. So, actually early on, I read a book by the founders of Basecamp. I don't know if you know Basecamp. It's a project management tool, and we use it at Mentoring Minds now as our kind of central communication hub for the whole company. We use it to manage our projects and marketing, but also across the company for communication. And the founders of Basecamp wrote a book called Remote Office Not Required. It's a great book. I can send you the link. But yeah, the idea too is like, you're not trying to replicate the office environment, right? You're trying to give people a healthy, safe place to work. And that might be in an office and it might be remote. And like, what does all that change entail? And that it's not necessarily just trying to, okay, it's the office, but you're at home. That lots of other changes might happen because of that change. And that's really exciting.
Oh, that's awesome. Jennifer, I feel like this is going to really help the people that are watching today. And so really appreciate you joining us and sharing what you've learned from your experiences.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me.
You bet. You have a good one.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Eric Colder. Eric is a labor and employment attorney and shareholder with Ramey and Flock. Hey, Eric.
How are you?
Doing great, man. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's good to be here.
For those of you who don't know Eric, he's a very sought after local resource for employment law. He is presented on labor and employment topics for the East Texas Human Resources Association, the Tyler Chamber, the Tyler Area Association for Legal Professionals, the Better Business Bureau, Rose City SHRM, tons of people. And so, Eric, again, we're honored that you'd be with us here today.
Oh, no, I appreciate it.
So as we talk about the East Texas Employment Survey, we've already learned that COVID-19 has caused a lot of movement for companies with their workforce. Only about 27% of respondents reported no change. So that means more than 70% of people are having change in their workforce, a movement of some kind. So there's laying off, there's furloughing, there's reducing hours, there's even some people that are hiring. And as you know, those kinds of activities tend to bring up questions about employment law. And so in that context, listen to this. In the next 3 months, employers have identified their number one challenge at 54%, and that is accommodating the requirements of COVID-19. And so, as you can imagine, when you think about accommodating those requirements and then add all this movement in the workforce, that's generated some confusion about what do we do when we're dealing with our employees. And so I'd love to run some scenarios by you.
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right. So first scenario, unfortunately, some of our businesses here in East Texas have had to furlough some employees. And so now, thankfully, they're ready to start opening up, bringing them back. And what we've heard is some employers have found that these guys, maybe let's just say they're less than eager to return to work. And so there's some questions on what's my response? What's the right response for an employer to an employee like that?
Sure. Yeah. So, and this is coming up. I've gotten numerous calls, emails from clients that are dealing with this very issue. So, and it's going to only increase as we continue to reopen. So, first thing is to consider is, and you probably considered this when you made your decisions on who to furlough and who not to furlough, is that you want to make sure that nothing you do even appears to be discriminatory. Right. So do pay attention to the demographics of the people affected. You don't want to have it skewed in any direction. Certainly, I don't believe anybody listening to this would do that intentionally, but it's something we should be mindful of when selecting who's going to come back from furlough, who's going to be even offered to come back. Now, when that person has made an offer to come back and they just simply refuse because they don't feel, quote, comfortable yet, you can let that person go for that reason. Now, again, the caveat I just gave about make sure that we don't look discriminatory as far as who are even asking to come back. But if the employer says time to come back to work, your job is available for you, and you say, well, I just don't want to come back, well, then that can be a terminable offense. Now, with that, consider this is a potential blind spot is if the employee has a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, additional leave, in this case, additional time at home, doesn't have to necessarily be paid leave or anything like that. If they're on furlough, then status quo. But it can be a reasonable accommodation depending on their disability. So if you know the employee has an ADA disability, go through the reasonable accommodation interactive discussion with them. Outside of that, if it's just I don't want to return to work because I don't feel comfortable getting out yet, then that is, you can't let the person go. Keep in mind though, TWC, normally in that scenario, the person would not be granted unemployment, generally speaking, right? They apply for unemployment benefits, they would normally be denied in that situation, but the TWC, given the current circumstances we're in, entered some guidance a couple of weeks ago that said, given the circumstances, we'll actually be probably granting people's unemployment benefits for people who are in a certain couple of categories. So one of them is people who are themselves at high risk. So let's say the person's over 65, which is an exact number that they gave in their guidance, or they have other underlying health conditions that put them at higher risk. If that person says, I don't feel like coming back, and you let them go, doesn't mean you did something wrong, but that person probably will get their unemployment benefits when normally they wouldn't. Same answer, believe it or not, for someone who is living with someone in their home who is at high risk. So, for example, if my wife was at high risk, or we were over 65, or she was and I wasn't, I said, look, I don't feel comfortable coming back because she's at high risk and I live with her, or if my parents live with me, something like that. Again, same answer. It's okay, you didn't do anything wrong by saying, well, you can't come back, you lose your job, but that person will more than likely get their unemployment benefits in this case. Doesn't mean you did anything wrong, just be aware of that.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Well, I know a lot of questions are coming in on these decisions related to any of the PPP or SBA loans that they've received. How does the decision like this affect those?
Yeah, very good question. This is coming up very often as well. So when it comes to loan forgiveness, right? So if you've already received PPP funds, what you're concerned with now is getting the loan forgiven. That's the big benefit of it. There are two main parts to think of when it comes to loan forgiveness. One, this is assuming you're using the money for the allowed purposes. So let's assume you're doing that. You've looked at the definition of payroll costs, allowable rent and utilities, and you're using it for those purposes. How do they determine how much of it is going to be forgiven? There's two main parts of it. One is the ratio or the calculation, and you see it kind of described multiple ways, but essentially it's this. To simplify it, it's your employee headcount during the 8-week period you use the money compared to your employee headcount in the past. And there's two different periods. They look back either the beginning of this year or the beginning of last year, essentially. So that ratio, if you had 100 and you have 100 now, 100%, you're good, you know. That's the first part of it. Now, what about people who you had to let go during, and this is the second part, during this crisis, and then you offered to, or you either have or offered to rehire them back by June 30th? Well, the SBA came out and said, well, if you do that, then we're not going to count that person against you. Okay. And that's a benefit. Now, what if, going back to the first part of the question that you asked a minute ago, what if you offer to bring that person back, but they refuse? Well, the SBA came out with guidance just last week that was very helpful. They said if you make an offer for someone to come back who was laid off or furloughed as of during this period, and they refuse, if you make the offer in writing and they refuse and you document it, the SBA says we won't count that person against you for the ratio. So that's a very good benefit. So if you have people refusing, make sure you make the offer in writing, document their refusal, and then obviously keep that documentation. And when we get to loan forgiveness, that person should not count against you for your forgiveness ratio.
Wow, that's some really important information. That's good. Okay, well, here's another same question, but slightly different scenario. I know some employers have sent their office home to work remotely, and now they're reopening the office. And some employers have found their employees have gotten used to working remotely and would like to stay. What's the appropriate response to those employees?
Yes, and that goes back to the same answer to the first question. So first off, if you don't have an issue with the person working remotely more than they had in the past, or you think that's a good idea, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But now, if that was just a part-time accommodation you made, I don't want to use the ADA accommodation languages. I'm not saying it was necessarily an ADA accommodation, but if you made that accommodation during this period and now you say, okay, now it's time to get back to normal, come back to work, and the person refuses, again, that you can let that person go. If they steadfastly refuse, they're not entitled to work remotely per se. Again, going back to what I said earlier, ADA reasonable accommodation can be remote work. So let's exclude that from the conversation. If the person has a disability, that would where increased or more frequent telework would be an accommodation. Outside of that, it's the same analysis. The employer gets to decide where the work needs to be done, and just because the employee has liked the prior arrangement doesn't mean the employer can't say, well, back to normal, come into the office, come into the plant, et cetera. And again, if they steadfastly refuse, then that person can be let go for that. Okay,
makes sense. Another scenario, I know there's been some guidance from the governor about and others about what's the appropriate response if I have COVID-like symptoms and maybe I'm supposed to self-quarantine or things like that. What are the employer's obligations concerning PTO for these kinds of employees?
Yeah, so when it comes to PTO, or we call it paid sick leave for this, because that's what the statute calls it. So if you remember way back in March, it seems like a long time ago now, there was the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act or Response Act, FFCRA, another acronym for alphabet soup, but it just never ends. So that statute allowed all employees for companies with 500 or less employees, allowed them 2 weeks of paid sick leave it had 5 delineated reasons. So 2 of those were, one is if you actually under an isolation order or a quarantine order, so let's say that you went to a doctor and you have it, or if you're experiencing symptoms and you're seeking a diagnosis, that counts too. If you're caring for someone else who has been diagnosed, you have to be actually caring for them, not just know them. That can be a reason too. So again, that's 80 hours at paid sick leave, 2 weeks, 10 work days. It's described each one of those ways. And the good thing about it is that paid sick leave will be reimbursed to the employer through their payroll taxes. So it's subsidized to the government. You have to keep track of it, and it's a payroll tax credit. So, theoretically, it's just a cash flow issue. You pay it now, the government pays you back. So that's the you have to offer it as well, right? So it's not optional. You offer it, you can be reimbursed if they qualify for one of those reasons. And there's other, caveats to various parts of it if you're a healthcare provider, et cetera. But to simplify it, that's the general rule.
Got it. Similar question. I know some folks may be at home because their kids' daycare or schools are closed and there's nobody to care for their kids. How does the PTO or paid sick leave apply here?
Yes. So I mentioned those 5 reasons earlier, and the 6th was a catch-all saying whatever else the Department of Labor says. Well, that's helpful. But and they've been adding to it and clarifying, and they have been helpful. But it's just when you read the statute, it's sort of a head scratcher that they have a catch-all like, oh, this is kind of open-ended. But right before that is a specific one, which is exactly this issue. If you have children whose school is closed or the daycare is closed due to COVID reasons, and you don't have adequate child care at home, you're entitled to paid sick leave. Again, reimbursable through your payroll taxes. Now, this leave is a little different. Number 5 here on the list of 6 that they gave is different than the ones I just mentioned in 2 regards. One is the paid sick leave is only at 2/3 the employee's regular rate, not their full regular rate. Secondly, you get the first 2 weeks like the other 4 items I mentioned, but then you actually get another 10 weeks, which you don't get for the other reasons. Again, 2/3 regular rate, paid sick leave up to 12 weeks total, like FMLA. In fact, the last 10 weeks are under the FMLA statute. But if you add them together, it's basically you get up to 12 weeks for that reason, 2/3 of regular rate if you have children whose school or daycare is closed due to COVID and you don't have adequate health care. So it's a little bit different scenario, but that is an entitlement to employees.
Okay. So an employer could offer PTO or needs to offer PTO at 2/3 rate or 100% or anywhere in between, but they'll get reimbursed the 2/3 rate. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That's a good way to think about it. Exactly. So if you're paying them 2/3, if you're paying them their full rate, 2/3 of that, with 2/3 of that they're entitled to, and 2/3 of that will be reimbursed, not the full amount though.
I got you. That makes sense. And that's really helped us untangle some of the knots that come with all this information. And I know there is so much information out there. Where would you point people if they were looking for resources?
Yeah, and that might be the most important question that you've asked thus far, because this is all we're talking about is a moving target. Things change more rapidly than we've ever seen before just because of the circumstances. I would give this strong recommendation, and I would go to the primary sources. So Department of Labor website, SBA website, the CDC's website, TWC website. Go directly to their websites for information. You type in DOL COVID, you're going to have that Q&A. I think it's up like 93 questions now and answers, and you can just do Control F and find your question if you have it. Very, very helpful. The reason I say that is that I have personal experience with clients, even on the phone, where we're looking at the statute or the regulations or the guidance from these websites, and then you find a reputable news source reporting on it, and it's not quite accurate. And I understand why that might be the case, because things are coming out very fast and trying to be first, trying to be accurate. And there's a lot to digest and include in an article, but we've seen things that are just objectively wrong in reputable news sources. Now, I'm not saying they didn't correct it the next day or whatever, but if I'm making a decision today based on I won't give the names, but I'm saying a reputable news source, and I'm relying on that as opposed to the Department of Labor, SBA websites, et cetera, I might fall into a trap. It's hard enough for those government entities to keep it straight between themselves, and they've done a good job of, when they contradicted, to try to remedy it to make them combine for a cohesive story here. So that's my strong recommendation. Do keep up to date on it, and do go to the primary sources because they're doing a good job of having user-friendly websites with most up-to-date information. And if you looked it up 3 days ago and you saw the answer, you may want to look it up again today if you're making a decision today, because it may have changed.
Wow, things are changing fast. Eric, that is extremely helpful. And I know everybody out there is really grateful that you've shared with them. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity.
You got it, man. You have a good one.
You too.
Okay, next up, we've got Dave Anderson, Amazon best-selling author of one of my favorite books, Becoming a Leader of Character. There he is. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Adam. How you doing?
Man, it's good to see your face.
Absolutely. Even if it's got to be virtually. That's the world we live in today.
That's right. It's better than nothing. Well, hey, for those of you who don't know Dave, he is a West Point graduate, a decorated combat veteran, spent 20 years in the Fortune 50 world, leading there. And now he consults with leaders of companies of all sizes here in East Texas and around the country. Dave, we're really honored you spent some time with us.
Well, I appreciate being here. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Well, let's just jump right in. We're talking about the East Texas Employment Survey, and we asked business owners and leaders in East Texas, what are their most pressing workforce management needs? And I'd love your take on what they said. I want to read to you their top 3 responses. Okay. The first number 1 response of their most pressing needs is managing employee workloads. And I guess that could mean anything from, unfortunately, I've had to lay off some folks, and how am I going to divide what's left among who's left? Or it could be a few of our companies are actually busier, and how are we going to manage that? Number 2 is improving organizational morale. Obviously, if you're having to lay off or if there's a lot of uncertainty, that affects morale in a company. And then the number 3, right below, is retaining top talent. I want to make sure I keep my A players. So Dave, as you hear those 3 statistics together, what kind of picture do they paint?
What they paint is a leadership picture. I mean, I think back on the time when I was deployed in the military, and there are these 2 teams, 2 young lieutenants leading 2 separate teams. And the teams were of equal skills and equal capabilities and things. But what you saw is during a time of stress, during a time of uncertainty, there were a lot of differences that happened within these 2 teams. One team was of high morale and one team was of low morale. And there was really no other reason for it except for the leaders. Because when I look back at those 2 leaders, I see those 2 lieutenants, I think about what I saw digging foxholes when we were right on the border waiting to go into Iraq. And the leader of the high morale team, he was right in digging the foxholes with his team, where the other leader of the low morale team, he sat back and watched his team do it. He didn't even communicate with his team directly. He went to his second in command and had his second in command share what he wanted to have happen. And what I saw over time was those 2 teams separated themselves. One team rose and one team fell as far as morale goes. And it all went back to which leader was willing to get in there and get their hands dirty when it was time to do that. And I talk about this being a leadership environment right now. In times of crisis, we always talk about leadership being a blend of competence and character. The competency in those 2 teams were there, but the character of the leaders, what came out. And, people pay more attention to what we say than what we do. And especially in this time right now of uncertainty, a lot of leaders are going to be out there saying all the right things, but what are they doing? See, our character is not about what we say. It's about who we are. What do people see from us? How do we behave? And these times of crisis, character shows up. Good character shows up and bad character shows up. And the other thing that happens during uncertainty is our character is shaped through these times as well. And so the question is, what choices are we making during this time? Are we choosing to let fear control us? The unknown makes some people just kind of hold back and pause and do nothing, or react in ways that really drive morale down. Or is it pride? Some leaders during this time are going to sit back and say, hey, I know what we need to do, not listen to their people, not pay attention to the feedback they're getting, and feel like, hey, I've got the answers, even though nobody has the answers, because nobody's been through a pandemic before, right? And led during a pandemic before. Or the opposite choice is courage, right? Instead of fear, they choose courage. And they choose courage to act. They choose courage to move forward. They choose courage to communicate, even when they don't have all the answers. Or they choose humility, where they choose to listen to people. They choose to listen to maybe they're even listening to a junior member of their team who actually understands the Zoom stuff, even though a lot of us leaders might not be very good at it, right? I mean, the willingness of a leader to listen during this time, the willingness of a leader to embrace and exercise courage during this time, is going to shape not only the teams that they lead or the companies that they lead, but even the families that they lead. And in times of crisis, it is that character that's going to make the difference in how the individual, the team, the organization, the family comes through this time.
Wow. I love that. So this is it's a challenge for a leader, but it's also an opportunity to really make a huge difference. So let's drill down into that for a second. Let's say I'm one of those leaders. These questions are on my mind and I want to know, okay, I want to embrace this opportunity. What do I do? What's most important for me to remember and to actually do? You've led in a lot of contexts. What would you tell a leader like me?
Crisis Management 101 is communicate, communicate, communicate. No team has ever failed because of too much communication. It's almost always the opposite. And sometimes as leaders, we feel like if I don't have all the answers right now, I've got nothing to say. But the problem is when people don't hear from the leadership, they fill in the blanks with the negative. They don't fill it in with the positive. You know, I always joke when my son Jake was in high school and he was supposed to be home at 11 o'clock and it was 11:20 and I hadn't heard from him. I didn't fill in the blanks with, oh yeah, he's volunteering at the nursing home. You know?
Right.
The thing that goes through your head is he's dead on the side of the road somewhere or he's doing something he shouldn't be doing.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
our people, and our people during these times, if they don't hear from the leader, it's going to be the negative stuff that comes to their mind. So even if we don't have information for them, being in front of them, making sure they hear and see us. I mean, seeing us is difficult during social distancing, but we've got this technology here that we can use. Whether or not it's a team Zoom call or whether or not you're touching base with each individual that you're responsible for leading and just checking in with them. Saying,
that's right.
How you doing? Hey, I know you're working from home. I hear the dog in the background. I know you're probably homeschooling kids. I know you've got a spouse that's trying to do all this tough stuff at the same time as well. What obstacles can I move out of your way today?
It's a whole twist on leadership by walking around, but it's digitally instead of physically.
Absolutely. We build trust through communication. And so, there's the old saying that, if something's important, it's worth repeating. And so as we talk to our people, they need to keep hearing from us. They need to hear about our vision for the company of what's this going to look like when COVID-19 dies down? What are we going to be doing? Maybe you have a company vision, purpose statement, whatever, and keep putting that out there saying, this is what we're about. COVID-19 is going to come and go. We're always going to be about this stuff. And talking about it over and over and over again. And, the example I use is 15 minutes can save you 15% on car insurance.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
You think? Yeah. I mean, Geico's got it right. They know that the more that you repeat something, the more people are going to remember it.
Right.
And I think leaders, sometimes we forget that we think that, well, because I said it once, people are going to remember it.
Right.
No, not at all. And during this time of crisis, they need to hear from us over and over and over again.
Right. That's so true. And that really makes a difference. I love that you said that. And one of the big concerns here that they expressed was team morale. And I know that a lot of other problems can be more easily solved if morale is high. And so, beyond communicating, are there other ways that a leader can influence the morale of their organization?
Yeah. And I would say that going back to that example I used of the two young lieutenants, the problem solving of the team with high morale, they got things done. And where things just kind of were grinding away for the other team with the lower morale because of the leader of the leader and what he didn't do in those situations. And so for leaders right now, I would say one thing that we need to do is we need to always be encouraging people. The word encourage means to give courage. And so, actually the word courage comes from the French word cœur, which means heart. So when we encourage people, we give them heart. So again, find people doing the right things. People need to know that they're valued right now. They might not be as in contact with you as frequently as they would normally be on a day-to-day basis. So now we need to be intentional in reaching out to people. Don't wait for them to come to you. Go to them, speak with them, talk with them. Find them doing the right things and encourage them. Say, hey, we're going to get through this together. What can I do for you? What do you need from me? You know, I was speaking to a police chief just early this morning, and he was talking about all the policies that they were having to put into place.
Right.
And I wanted to refocus him, because I said, yeah, the policies are great, but are you spending as much time phrasing that policy in an email as you are thinking about how you're communicating with your team and the individuals on your team? Wow, great point. Because we can get caught up in all these new policies and things that we need to do during these strange times. But the important thing is the people need to know that we're there for them.
Wow, that's so good.
And I would say again about the big picture, the vision and things, keep the big picture in mind. If we are looking right over the hood of the car and only seeing the problems right in front of us, every problem feels like a pothole, right? And actually a pothole feels like a crater is probably more likely.
Sure.
And so when your eyes are all the way down the road and you can see all the way down the road, you hit that same pothole, it's just like, dunk, it doesn't make a big impact. Right. So keep people focused down the road, keep them focused on the big picture and what we're doing as an organization and the plans of the organization, and help and just communicate.
I love that, because it's human. A leader, sometimes we think we need to go do something extraordinary or nobody's ever heard of, but really we're talking about connecting with people. And that's so important. Thank you so much for sharing that today.
Absolutely. People are going to remember more about what we do than what we say. And so our willingness and our being available to people and making ourselves available and putting ourselves in front of them is what people are going to remember, to include our families.
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much for sharing that. I bet some people that are just introduced to you might want to know how they could find out more. If they wanted to find out about your book or what you do, how could they reach you?
Well, the easiest way is to go to our website, becomingaleaderofcharacter.com. www.becomingaleaderofcharacter.com. We have character assessments there. We've got a whole lot of resources there that are free resources as well that people can download. You can also email me at dave@alslead.com. That's Alpha Lima Sierra.com. Happy to be in touch with people. We're going to be starting up classes again this summer. They're going to start out virtual, and we're going to ease back into the live classes here in East Texas and get those back. We've had over 500 East Texas leaders go through the classes during the last 6 years. So hopefully people out there will be interested and get involved in our classes again, because right now leadership is more important than anything at any other time, probably in the history of our businesses.
Sure.
And that's where we got to hang our hat, is leadership and also the character of the leader.
Right. Man, that's such a good message today. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I know everybody's going to appreciate that. I'm sure they're out there in the Zoomverse. They're giving you a standing ovation right now. Dave, thanks again. Maybe I'll get to see your face for real one of these days.
Yeah, hopefully soon, Adam. I appreciate it.
You got it. We'll see you, buddy.
All right.
Okay, last but not least, I'd like to introduce all of you to Rocky Gill. Rocky opened Express Employment Professionals in 1995. Hey, Rocky.
Hello, Adam.
1995, that's 25 years ago, coming up here at the end of the year.
That's why there's a shine right up here. Yeah.
Well, just a little bit about Rocky. If you guys don't know, he and his team are annually recognized as one of the top offices out of over 800 Express franchises in North America. And more importantly, since 1995, we have put well over 20,000 people to work. And our goal is we want to put 5,000 people to work in a year. That's what we're headed towards. So, Rocky, thanks so much for taking some time to talk with us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm interested in your take on this. We asked people in this survey about their primary challenges looking ahead in the next 3 months. And interestingly, or maybe not surprisingly, over half indicated reconnecting with customers or clients as something that's really high on their radar. It's top of their mind. And that makes sense given all the disruption in business. So as somebody who's been in business here in East Texas for a while now, what's your response to that? What's your take on that?
Well, this unfortunately was not my first rodeo in economic challenges. We went through this here in our office in 2009, and we learned a lot of things from that. one thing we learned was the value of connection with our customers. And, you know, when you think about it, that is where you make your living. And there's really not ever a good excuse to not be connected to your customers. And you might say, well, I kind of felt bad about calling people and trying to sell them anything or whatever. And I fully get that. I received 2 different phone calls. One was from a really good friend who's a development officer for a nonprofit. And he called me to tell me that he left me a voice. He didn't live very far from my office. And he said, I know things must be rough. I'm actually praying for you and for your business. And if there's anything I can do for you, I don't live very far away. I could be there quickly. And I just want you to know I'm available if you need me. And that just spoke volumes to me. And then within about 24 hours, I received another call from the Lindale Chamber of Commerce. And we're members, our business is members there. And it was much the same type of call. We don't need anything. We're not asking for anything. But I want you to know we are here for you if you need anything at all. And those are perfect examples of how you can stay connected with customers in times like this, because, you know, we've been hearing from a lot of marketing sources, we're in this together. And the fact is that we are. And so I guess a lesson I learned in 2009 was you can never overemphasize the need to stay in touch with your customers. Because they're the people that put food on your table. And, you know, I know a lot of businesses have kind of gone into hiding, and I can understand the feeling and the want to do that, but it's just very important that we don't do that. So just, if nothing else, make a note for the next time we get the wind knocked out of us like this, that it's always important to stay in touch, and especially so in hard times. The second thing about connection with your customers is that this is a great time to reevaluate your complete strategy for how you keep in touch with people. I would encourage you to just get a blank sheet of paper or a blank whiteboard and write down all the different ways you can connect with people and develop a brand new strategy. I mean, we've all learned, just like this call today, we're on Zoom together. And frankly, it may be just as good, if not better, than being in person, just because we're getting good information and we're connected together. So there are new ways to do things, and that's not all bad. And even if we're not concerned about transmitting a virus back and forth, it can save you a lot of time. You don't have to drive to meetings if it's just not really necessary. You can get what you need sometimes through a technological means, just like we're on today. So I think it would be helpful for all of us, and I'm certainly going to do it in my business, to reassess all the ways we can connect and make sure that going forward, we're smartest about that and do it in the most effective way possible. So those are some thoughts that I've had about connection.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because what I'm hearing you say is, one, it's not necessarily about trying to get something from somebody, but it's about a relationship. It's about really connecting with that person.
Absolutely.
And then 2, you know, this situation has forced us to uncover some new tools. So now our toolbox is actually bigger for the ways we can make those relationships and connect. And so in a way, you know, we're going to come out of this even stronger. If you already got a bent for relationships, now we've got some more tools in our toolbox to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it'll be interesting to see, you know, how that changes, you know, the way we relate to each other moving forward. But the key thing to remember, I'm hearing you say, is relationships.
Absolutely.
We're going to prioritize those.
That's true.
I think that's great advice that you've given to strategize, to kind of clean off the whiteboard, see where we can go from here. And I'll be curious how that works out for our office as we do that. And I'd love to hear from some others what they've come up with as well.
Absolutely. Adam, may I just say, take a second here to say thank you to everyone that took the survey. It was a lot of fun for us to be able to hear the input from people in our community. And I'm just grateful for everyone that spoke and gave us information. I think it's going to be helpful for all of us. So, and thank you, Adam, for all you've done to make this a reality.
You got it. Thank you, Rocky, for your time today. And we'll see you probably tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you.
See you, Rocky. Okay, I can't think of a better group of leaders that we could have heard from today. And so I just want to, first of all, just again, say thank you to all the panelists that made today possible. For you guys who attended, I wish I could have seen you in person, but I'm so glad that you were able to show up today and participate with us. I want to let you know what you're going to get after this meeting. We're going to follow this up. We're going to clean up the recording. We'll send you a link to that. We're going to send you all those recommended resources that were mentioned today. We'll send those to you as well, as well as the summary of the takeaways. And before we get out of here, I think I need to give an iPad away. We promised we would once we passed 500. We did that. And so I've got a bowl here that's got everybody's name in it that took the survey. And I'm going to reach in here and see who we pull out to get a new iPad. And I know you guys are all drumming on your desks for a drum roll. Thank you for doing that. Rhonda Goldthorn, you've won a new iPad. And we're going to reach out to you and talk to you about getting that to you. I'm looking forward to seeing you and getting that iPad over to you. Congratulations. To everybody else, thank you so much for being here again. Look forward to being in touch with you as well. And we will say goodbye for now. Thank you so much.